And tonight we're delighted to have Connecticut Humanities here for the second in the Food for Thought series. And we have Amanda Roy. Thank you, Amanda. Good to see you.
Thank you. So my name is Amanda Roy. I'm a program officer at Connecticut Humanities. Now, Connecticut Humanities is the Connecticut state affiliate to the National Endowment for the Humanities. And so since the fall of last year, what we've been doing is exploring the connection between food and the humanities. So we've called it Food for Thought. We've been looking at the culture of food, how we share food, how we grow our food, all the different aspects that relate to the history all the way up to the present of how food relates to our lives, because everybody's life is impacted by food. What we're doing now is looking at local agriculture, sustainability, food justice, who has access to the food that we grow here in the state or that's grown nationally. Eventually we'll progress this into our next initiative, which is called Connecticut at Work. And so in Connecticut at Work, we'll turn our Food for Thought initiative into a look at the work that goes behind the food that we eat or the food that we've grown. Looking at agriculture, we have a massive agricultural history in this state, so we'll definitely be exploring that and connecting it all the way up to the present and what's the future. There's, a lot of buzz about farming possibly being a new wave of profession for young people. I've met a 26-year-old farmer whose grandparents told him he was totally insane for deciding to become a farmer, because why would a 26-year-old want to be a farmer? But we'll explore those topics a little bit, and that will go all the way through December of 2014. So we have a lot of talk about food at the Humanities. Tonight, we're looking at local agriculture, and I'd like to look at Wallingford a little bit specifically, but looking at the state as well. When Beth contacted me about doing this program here, I was pretty excited because my local roots are from Wallingford. My grandfather was a farmer here in Wallingford. He came down here in 1959. My mother was the oldest of 10 children, and they moved to a farm. None of them spoke English. They all spoke French. It was a dairy farm called Aaron Isle Farm, which still exists. It's smaller now. It's a really important part of our family's past. And before I came to the library this evening, I decided to take a drive, and I hadn't been by there in a long time. And where our little family farmhouse was is a massive housing development now. So just a very different look from the way that it was back then. It's an important part of the discussion tonight, I think, that we're losing farmland, and but there's also farmland that's growing in other parts of the country. John Turenne is the founder and president of Sustainable Food Systems. He is a nationally recognized leader and innovator in sustainable food practices. In his role as executive chef at Yale University and in the creation of the Yale Sustainable Food Project, John recognized the impact of food service decision-making on the world around us. Sustainable Food Systems is the cutting edge in developing best practices tailored to benefit both the planet and the bottom line for clients. Sustainable Food Systems helps its clients integrate healthier food and sustainable practices into their existing programs and systems with an interest in connecting clients to local food producers. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you guys for having me here. I have never actually spoken in my town before. So I happen to represent, I guess, the other end of the food chain when it comes to agricultural production and consumption. I'm an eater and I'm a cooker. Is the best way to describe it. I'm a trained and schooled chef, and I have been a food service manager. I think the critical thing is to understand the tipping point, and when things changed for me personally and professionally, and now why I do what I do, and to tell you what I do. I went to culinary school in Providence, Rhode Island, and got a job shortly thereafter as a chef at a college down here in New Haven called Albertus Magnus College. Not the other college in New Haven. Yeah. I just was, all I wanted to do was cook. And lo and behold, while I was working at this college as an assistant chef, this large contract food service company came in and took over managing the food service at Albertus Magnus College and kind of adopted all the employees. So, I mean, you have to imagine, I'm a 21-year-old, spit and vinegar could care less, youngster saying, oh, they're saying you're going to now be an employee of this contract food service company. I says, look, is it going to affect my pay? No. Is it going to affect my benefits? No. How about days off? No. I said, whatever, and I don't care. The company, I soon came to realize, managed institutional food services all over the country. They were large. And when I define institutional food service, the best way I usually describe it is places that have to serve a lot of food to a lot of people for very little money. Schools, hospitals, colleges, you get the picture? Institutional food service. I soon kind of got the picture here that if I played my cards right, I worked hard, and I learned I could move up the corporate ladder. And I did. I moved my way up to the point where I was the chef manager at Albertus Magnus College. And then the company offered me a job as a manager. It was a low manager on a totem pole. And I took the apron off and put on the jacket and tie at Choate Rosemary Hall here in Wallingford. And I was there for 10 years. And again, I did what I guess I needed to do and eventually became the food service director at Choate Rosemary Hall. Other than the job I'm in now, I can honestly say it was the best job I ever had. It's a wonderful place to work, and that's how I ended up settling in Wallingford. Went from Choate, company moved me to Wesleyan University as a food service director. That's a story for another day over perhaps some cocktails. It's just, it was if Choate was the best job, Wesleyan was the best learning experience I could possibly have. Had a very volatile customer base with the student body that protests the drop of a hat, questioned authority. I represented authority. I had a unionized workforce that hated management. I was management. And I had to run a profit and loss. Everything was dollars and cents. How much money was I going to make running a food business? How much could I cut and save in managing labor and dollars and food, so that I could buy from big business and big box processed food so I could make money and make profit for this company. 7 years later, I raised my hand and said, it's time for me, I got to get out of it. This was driving me, pretty crazy. So the company had said, look, we just got the account. We are the first Ivy League school has contracted with a contract company. Yale University is on board. We need an executive chef. Would you like to go home and consider if you'd like to be the executive chef at Yale University? And I said, no. They said, what do you mean no? I said, I'm not going to go home and consider it. I'm answering you right now. Yes! How could I possibly turn down a job like that? And use all the management experience I've gathered in the past, but also put my chef coat back on. And even though I wasn't cooking because we had a large culinary staff, I oversaw all the cooks, and it's a big place. We're serving 6,000 undergraduates, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You do the math, it's a lot of food. Everything was about dollars and cents. How can we reduce costs? You got to reduce food costs. Don't maximize labor, use processed food, save money for the client, save money, save. Dollars and cents, bottom line driven. About 2 years into the job there, on one particular day, everything changed. It was the beginning of the change for me, I guess, is when it happened. And you have to imagine, I was out at the Yale Bowl setting up, it was a Friday afternoon in November of 2001, and I was setting up for a picnic for the next day for the game, Yale-Harvard football game. And my cell phone rang, it was my boss, and he said, stop what you're doing, come to the president's office, we need to meet with a parent. I'm like, time out a second here. I'm busy getting ready for this, what we got to do tomorrow, and all these students and picnic, and you're the one that usually meets with parents. And I've never been called to the president's office. What's going on? Who is this? And he says, well, her name is Alice Waters. And for those of us in the food industry, that name Alice Waters, could run shivers down your back. That month's Gourmet magazine came out with its annual top 50 restaurants in the United States. Alice is a restaurateur owner of a restaurant in Berkeley, California called Chez Panisse. guess whose restaurant was ranked #1 in the country? And this was a parent and who wants to talk to the guy who's feeding her kid. Well, the first thing I had to do was pick the phone off the ground and stop stuttering. And I said, "Oh, okay, I've got to meet with Alice Waters. Oh my God!" So, needless to say, Alice had convinced the president of Yale to think differently about the food that they were providing these future global leaders of our country. Think about the impact that it has on everything around us, on the environment, the impact that it has on local businesses, on local farms, on health and nutrition, on social issues like animal welfare, human rights, and employee welfare, all these kind of things. And you should really put in a sustainable food program. She was ramming this home. And the president was enamored, said, I really like what this crazy woman from California is talking about, and went to the company that he had hired to manage the food service, and went to the president and said, you know what, figure out what she's talking about. I want to see if we can do it here at Yale. And the company really wanted to keep the account at Yale, and how the proverbial manure rolls downhill. I guess this is an agricultural discussion, compost. It eventually, the vice president for New England and the director of food service at Yale came to the executive chef and said, figure out what this woman is talking about. And we want to put in a pilot kitchen of a sustainable food program here at Yale University. Now, I had been in charge of a lot of projects, a lot of fads, a lot of food things had come and gone over the course of, at this point, I'd already worked for this company, Institutional Food Service, for 20 years. And I said, sure, whatever's next. We put in pizza concepts and wraps and vegetarians and vegans and this and that, and they come, they go, whatever. I have one question. What the heck is sustainable food? So Alice said, come with me. Alice stands about this tall, but she's got the power and energy of somebody, of a giant. And she taught me, literally, I went to school, literally and figuratively, to understand what is sustainable food. And that's when, as I learned, this is when the light bulbs started going off in my head, more so than light bulbs in the past, I guess. But I started to realize that that every decision I made, and you have to imagine there was a lot of money at stake here, and a lot of things beyond money, that everything I made, buying food and planning menus and training staff, impacted the environment, how food was grown, what did it do to the planet, what did it do to the water systems, pesticides, herbicides, in large-scale food production, distances food was traveling, packaging, all these kind of things I never thought about, were impacted. Also, the second pillar of sustainable food that I came to learn was how did my decisions impact my local community? Where were my dollars going, and where were they not going? And I had to start plugging into the local agricultural community, which I had no idea even existed. I just thought food came out of a truck. It came out of a warehouse up in Cromwell that we ordered through a computer based on code numbers. That's what I knew, and I had to plug into understanding the whole local community, and that's when I started connecting with true champions, true artisans, true rock stars, the farmers, and the people that produce food here in Connecticut and around southern New England. And lastly, the last pillar of sustainable food that I come to learn was the impact that it has on our bodies. My customers' health, and how food can make us healthy and food can make us not so healthy. So when this went off and I realized that food was more about common sense as opposed to dollars and cents, and we said, we got to figure this out. We had to do this. So Yale is set up to have 13 residential colleges and dining halls. One of the dining halls was chosen to be the pilot site. It was the Berkeley Dining Hall, which was a completely ironic name. The connection to Berkeley, California there is none. It was, people might say, people say that's where Alice's daughter was, so that's where it wasn't where she went. It wasn't her residential college. It it was what it was. But I had to, go in and start figuring out how to put in a sustainable program. And through that process, and this is not a discussion that we could take up, I could take up another 2 hours about how the peaks and valleys that we went through. But what ended up happening was it worked. We ended up scaling back, this monster we had created, all about choices and options of cheap food, and came up with a menu only this big, but it was about food that had a great story behind it. That was sourced as locally as we possibly could. That was organic when we could figure that out, and also was just fresh. And we promoted all these stories behind it, and many times brought in a farmer if we could to meet with the kids. It was so popular. The one story that I can't avoid sharing with you guys is that we had to start turning away students from the Berkeley dining hall. You have to imagine 13 dining halls used to always run the same menu every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so kids could go wherever they wanted to eat. Now Berkeley had a unique menu. Now granted, it was no longer about choices, all these options and burgers and pizza and delis and all these hundreds of things. It was about less choices, which had made me scared to death initially. What's going to happen? It was so popular, we had to stop kids from coming in unless they lived in that residential hall. They had to show us their ID. I'm a Berkeley student. You know what the kids did? What's common on it?
Fake IDs.
Kids are creating fake IDs on a college campus to sneak. Now, fake IDs on a college campus are not uncommon, generally for beverages. But kids were sneaking in because it taught me that with the right method of change, it wasn't just pull this menu item out, put that menu. There was a whole system that we put into place. It can work. And at that point, now we're into 2005. We were having to spread it to the other colleges at Yale, and we were getting inundated from other institutions, other schools, other colleges, asking, how did you do it? What did you do? And that's when really the leap of faith happened with myself is that, we need to bring this to other people. This can happen. We can do this. And my first instinct was, look, I've worked for 25 years for this company. We've got 350 college campuses, let alone the hundreds of schools, the hundreds of hospitals that we manage in this country. Why don't we start doing this in other places? And I went to the vice president that told me to do this, and I said, let's do it. I want to be involved. Let's start spreading this out. This is the direction our industry needs to go. And he said, stop. You've done a great job here, and we're really grateful, but it's not the direction we want to go. And there were reasons for that, and we could get into that. But before I knew what came out of my mouth, I said, it's the direction I'm going. I can't go back. You can't get me to start serving the crap that has terrible stories behind it, if they have any stories at all. I want to continue going on this road, and it works. We put in a system. We have a system in place here that'll work. And I want to be able to do this. So thank you for 25 years of employment. I'm calling. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out. I gave like a 4-month notice for the rest of the academic year. And several people from even the company pulled me aside and said, you're nuts if you don't create a consulting company that can go out and help other people do this. So that's how, I'm a chef, I'm a manager, I'm an eater, but I'm an advocate in institutions, and have figured out how do we provide better food to our kids in schools, to our patients in hospitals, to the young adults, the future leaders in colleges. It can happen. It's not easy. There are a lot of challenges, but it'll work. And I've been doing this now for about 8 years, and it's had its peaks and valleys. It's a leap of faith to do this. And as I mentioned, the previous best job I ever had in the world was at Choate Rosemary Hall. But nothing can hold a candle to this now. I believe this is the direction we need to go. The connection to local agriculture is one of those 4 pillars of sustainable food. Was how we can support our local communities. Where do our dollars go? And I know in the state of Connecticut, it was somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 acres of farmland are lost a year to developments, to golf courses, to housing boom. They're gone. Not to mention the age of farmers retiring, and the good news is there are more young farmers. Thank God there are some. I shouldn't say more. There are some starting to come in, but we need a lot more to really get it, to provide us with this food, because there's not a lot of it. We're in a pretty crowded part of the country where we don't have huge farms, which is a good thing. We don't want huge farms. Monocrops, monoculture. There's a lot of reasons we don't, want to get on that road. But what we do have, we've got to sustain. We've got to support. Does this happen just in institutions, or as you see in restaurants? No, it needs to happen in our own homes. I mean, it changed the way that I eat and that my family eats. I do what I can, and we do what we can. And I try to teach my kids to understand and respect where food comes from and the stories behind the food. One of the things that I tell my clients in big schools and colleges and hospitals, and I'll tell families, is find out what you're doing right now when it comes to this sustainable food commitment, and draw a line and then just ask yourself, what's the next one thing I can do? Maybe it's, I'm going to start buying local milk that doesn't contain artificial growth hormones, or I'm going to start getting to a farmer's market once a week when they're open. What's the next one thing? And do it. And then draw that line, and then ask yourself, okay, what's the next one thing? And do it as a family. Do it as a team. Find out where you are. Do one more thing. And when you do that, just do one more thing. Yeah. Do you think you cannot, or do you think you can? And ask yourself, no, can't, or can.
Working with public schools, what's that like?
General public school industry in this country is having to work, of all the institutions that we work with, probably has the lowest cost per person to be able to provide food to. I mean, it's like $1.10 to feed a kid, and that's got to include covering labor costs. So that doesn't leave much for the cost of food, and it relies primarily, its funds come from the USDA, so from the federal government provides the funding to cover the food services, and many of the food services have to stand alone. They aren't supported by the school budget, the overall district budget. They have to break even, not so much make a profit, but avoid a loss, but break even. And what we found over the last few years is there has been a huge push nationally to get junk and crap out of the school foods and just get real food back in and start cooking again. Some schools and actually, I guess if I were to rank the institutions that I do most of my work with now, schools is probably number one. Higher ed is down. I mean, schools has been the biggest need. And there are a lot of kitchens that have been scaled back so much with staff that you literally have two, and I say this with respect, please, if anybody is a cook, the term, two lunch ladies who have been in these positions for a long, long time. Wonderful people. You can't find anybody more passionate about caring for their kids. But two people that have to serve 450, 500 kids lunch. You want to cook for 500 people every day of the week? It's impossible. So they're using a lot of processed food. So the shift is on from the USDA and the government to start providing resources, funding for better food, more whole fresh food. They just passed a couple of years back. It was passed the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which raised the nutritional standards for the criteria for what we have to serve our kids. Unfortunately, the big food companies have figured out ways to meet these standards and still send in the boxes of frozen food, but they still quote unquote meet these standards. So what I advocate for is go back to cooking. You gotta cook, and the challenge is, how do you do it with just 2 cooks for 500? In some school districts where food is prepared in a central kitchen, then that's gonna be, a helpful way out of it. I'm actually working with the city of New Haven right now, and they have a central kitchen where we can provide a lot of the food. And the project that I'm working on with them is a farm-to-school initiative focused on Connecticut grown food first, and then bordering states second, and then the Northeast third. These school districts create their bid specs, put it in the bid. This is what we want. We want Connecticut first, we want bordering states second, Northeast third. And that's going to come from the distributors, and we're beginning to do that in New Haven. Potentially be a model for other districts to go. So yes, long answer to your question, Amanda, but schools are starting to look at local. Many schools are starting gardens on school properties. You're shaking your head.
It's a lot of work.
Gardens are a lot of work.
Yeah, my sister's very active in Princeton with school gardens, and
You
it's
need
hard
somebody to take care of them at the height of when they're growing.
right, and she's
Okay.
basically the one that takes care of it. The town is really behind her, but it's a lot of work.
If it can be done, to whatever extent, at least the kids are the ones that have no connection to where food comes from. And they're inundated with media, screens, every day, all day, and media and marketing and the dollars that are spent on crap food. And I'm cleaning up my language here, folks. Believe me. Remember, I worked in kitchens. But that's what the millions and billions of dollars spent on the junk. And there's virtually no budgets for good food, real food. So we've got to do what we can to reconnect the dirt. Food doesn't come off the shelf.
Things come out of
Things
dirt.
come out of the dirt. And there are resources to help with some of the gardening, and granted, every place is different. But here in Connecticut, one of the resources is Connecticut NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association. They're an organization that supports not just organic farming, but local food, healthy, good. They were one of the first resources I tapped into to find where am I going to find local food. They also have an arm that's supporting school gardens and school farms too. So not an organization just for farmers. Yeah, it's great and it's made up of primarily farmers, but it's for eaters and people that need to and want to eat good food. Yes.
Why can't other schools just serve like a nice salad with some protein on it instead of all this rigmarole with cardboard lunches?
That's a great question, and some of them do attempt and try to do that. The challenge is getting the kids to eat this.
But that would be their only choice. We're limiting their options.
What ends up happening in public schools, it's an option, so the kids stop wanting to eat and will bring in their own lunch or go out to eat. And that school food is a business. Right, like it or not, it's a business. And one of the biggest challenges that we work with, I worked this last year in Fairfield Public Schools, was we really wanted to start cooking more from scratch, coming up with a lot of new recipes and really promoting this. But now we're in a district that has maybe less than half of the kids qualify for what's called free and reduced. And the free and reduced based on economic and the economics of a family, those kids are more apt to get the school lunch because it's free, or they pay a reduced rate. The other kids are going to either buy it if they like it, or bring their own lunch, or not eat lunch, or go out. If they're old enough in high school to go out. And the worst scenario is to change the food and try different menu items, and all of a sudden your participations, your sales start to drop. And now this food service budget that's going to make a break even is losing money. So one of the processes that I employ when I go to work with, and I highly advocate for, and what we did in Fairfield was, don't just change the menu. You've got to communicate to the customer what you're doing and why you're doing it, and get them fired up. These are kids. They're young kids. They're so, they're figure out what it is that makes them tick. And granted, I'm fortunate. I have 2 kids at home, so I can test at home. One of the aspects is get the kids to realize the lunch ladies are really cooks, and actually can be, chefs. Put them in a chef jacket and a chef hat. Well, when I go to work with these districts, I'm out in the cafeteria in my chef attire, and the kids are getting all fired up. Oh my God, they think it's, it's the Food Network. The Food Network they made chefs into rock stars. Take advantage of it. It sells what you're trying to do, and it helps get the kids to buy into a salad with chicken on it, which better meet the nutritional guidelines. Then all the better. The kids buy into it. And I mean, there's a process. And you should see me in a cafeteria. I've got them chanting, for chips, kale chips. Go home today and tell your parents you had chips, that the chef was in today and he made you chips. Tell them that, and then wait to see the reaction, and then tell them, but they were green. They were kale chips. You ever see kids that eat kale chips? They're not hard to make, and especially in these kitchens that have convection ovens. Convection oven is easier to cook something like a kale. Anybody here make kale chips?
Delicious.
They're delicious. They're a little tricky, in a conventional oven because the air's not moving around enough, but they can be made. You get a convection oven and they cook in 25% of the time and evenly. Of course, if you go put the fan on high, which I've done by mistake, there's green chips flying out. Not to do, but those are some of the things we do. So, yes, we've got to change the food, but we have to communicate to the stakeholders in the community and the customer and the cooks and the chefs and the parents what we're doing, why we're doing it, so that they're excited about it. That they're eating a falafel puff. It's not deep fried, but it's big falafel. Try that. Try this thing, and otherwise they're not going to. You just throw it out there. And so you guys remember perhaps school cafeteria lines, and they're a lesson in how not to merchandise, how not to market. People eat with their eyes, so you gotta. Get them to taste. Try this. Talk to them. Taste this. This is what this is. This is made. Try. This is made with chickpeas and parsley, and you can try. Dip it in this cool white sauce. I have a system that we learned at Yale that to this day I still employ. Anytime you're looking to make change in a food program, I call it a balanced approach to sustainable change. The wheel is the program you want to get to, even if it's in your home. If you want your family to eat this kind of food program, you've got to address 5 spokes. One of the spokes is the food. Where does it come from? What is it? All these things. So that's one spoke. We have to take into account the kitchen, the facilities. What do we have for equipment? That's another spoke. Another spoke is the people, the community. Who's the stakeholder in the schools? The customers, the staff, the managers, the teachers. In hospitals, it's physicians and nurses, administrators, CEOs, patients. So all these people have got to be connected to food change. It can't be just left up to the food cooks and the chefs. Another spoke in the wheel is communication. That's one piece of communication is this merchandising, marketing, talking, teaching, educating the customer, teaching and educating the staff. These are my staff over here. The cooks, teaching them how to start cooking differently and why. I went through this change. If I could do it and understand it, so can we teach them? So there's that piece to it as well. That's only 4 spokes on a wheel that requires 5 spokes. The 5th spoke on it is we through all this, we have to be respectful and knowledgeable of what our fiscal or financial budget is, as well as what the nutritional guidelines are. Because if we stray from that and we focus on everything else, within 6 months, somebody's going to say, stop. we're spending too much money, or we're not meeting nutritional guidelines, therefore we're going to lose federal funding, we're going to lose revenue from that. So, but if you address all 5 of those folks when you want to deal with change, it's impossible not to succeed. And it happens. And it was through that process that it worked at Yale, and it's through that process that we use in other places too. And the reason I use that spokes in the wheel is if you've ever ridden a wheel that requires spokes and any of them aren't working right, what happens? The wheel doesn't work. The wheel won't roll. So.
Live in Wallingford. Where do you tend to buy most of your fruit in the fall and winter and spring?
Good question.
Yeah, one of them is High Hill Orchards, which if anybody has not discovered, High Hill Orchards, which is technically in Meriden, but on the Wallingford line, way up on, what is that, Research Parkway? Research Parkway. Wayne Young is this 3rd generation farmer in this apple, pear, peach, raspberry, blueberry orchard. Sits way up on the top of the hill. It's an absolutely spectacular place to go visit because you can see, I think you can see all the way to Massachusetts, north and off the Long Island Sound, and at least New Haven to the south. And he practices IPM, which is not organic, but it stands for Integrated Pest Management, which means, without getting into too much technicality, this means that rather than just spray conventional chemical pesticides and herbicides based on the calendar, what tells him to just douse his trees, he pays attention to what his trees and his crops are doing and then addresses those accordingly. And most times with not, still an organic or non-chemical pesticide. Some farmers, I should address this too, this whole organic, non-organic, integrated pest management. There are some farmers that choose, and they're members of Connecticut NOFA as well, they just may not be certified organic, but they still choose, they practice what would be considered organic, or like Wayne does not use conventional pesticides and herbicides, but they don't, for their own reasons, they choose not to become certified. Some of them, it's the cost for certification. Other ones, some of these farmers are still radicals from the 60s, and anything that's got to do with the government and government certification, they're like, no. And so there's a lot of different reasons, but just because, it doesn't have to be organic. So to answer the question, High Hill Orchards as product, sometimes I just got to buy it from a conventional store, and wash it, but at least it's real.
So if we want to buy local in December, how do we do that in Connecticut?
Join Wayne Young's Winter CSA.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. There are, people here know what CSA stands for?
Yeah.
Community Supported Agriculture. It's a term which basically means upfront you provide a farm or farmer with a lump sum of money, and on a regular basis, he provides you with, or she provides you with, a basket or a bunch of food, like what you might see behind me here. And it's kind of cool when you think about it. And some of them are more expensive, less expensive. Some of them it's a monthly basket. Other ones it's a weekly. They're much more popular in the summer. And you think about it, and as the season progresses, your basket, because of what's in season, changes. So you have to be creative. You have to learn how to cook with leeks, with kale, collards, greens, and then no greens, and corn, and tomatoes, and peppers, and then that's gone. But in the winter, when Wayne teams up with other farmers, and we get onions, potatoes, rutabagas, turnips, garlic, winter vegetables. There are overwinter vegetables. So we were up there one day. Was it a winter CSA?
It was a winter CSA. It's November through February.
Once a month on a monthly basis.
Yes.
That's one option. There's not too many others.
Well, there are more winter
Well,
farmers
Western Street
markets
is
now,
open.
too.
That's true too.
City
City Seed does one on a monthly basis, I
I
think.
think it's every week through the winter.
Or every other.
Outdoors.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
outdoors.
But it's cool. Cool is probably the literal term, but it's really neat to go to. I have to thank you for reminding me. Yeah,
Where
go.
is it?
City Seeds Farmers Market is in New Haven and on Worcester Square.
They also do Edgewood alternate
Well,
heading.
they do a good job, but it's still, you're not getting fresh tomatoes in
You
February.
won't.
You know, you're eating what's growable
Root crops.
at that time of year, when some of the hydroponic,
That's
folks were selling last winter. But I have to tell you, as good as the food is, it's expensive. It's a lot more expensive than going to Big Y. And people have to make that conscious choice to be willing to spend that kind of money, especially in the winter. But even as down at those markets, they get top dollar for high quality produce. And one of the experiences I had was trying to sell apples to the Bizzutos or to the regional market in Hartford. And frankly, unless you can guarantee them the quantities that people were talking about, and also an absolute uniform size and quality, so that they can make those beautiful pyramids of fruit, in big wide that don't fall down when somebody pulls one out. And we laugh about it, but it's absolutely true. And the simple fact is that people will not, without making a conscious choice like a lot of the people here do, eat an apple that has a blemish or has that little brown spot on it from, I forget what bug causes it, that Wayne doesn't spray for or sprays minimally for. And people won't eat that.
You have to be really careful today too, because big business is smart. Big business is out to make money, and they leverage whatever opportunity they can get to appear like they're adhering to the latest trends in natural. If anybody sees the term natural on anything, you know how natural is technically defined? Nothing. There is no technical. I got an email today with a picture of Pepsi natural. And on the back it showed the ingredient list. It didn't say organic or it just said natural. So you really gotta do your homework. Michael Pollan, and I'm going to sound like I'm bashing big business, big agriculture, but I guess I am, because I was part of supporting them for so many years, I guess. But Michael Pollan puts it this theory that I kind of get it. You think about it. Food is business. Food is money, and big business has stockholders, boardrooms. They need to make profits, and they need to increase profits on a regular basis, just like any big business. The statistics don't lie. We've got issues on our hands, folks. We've got to be careful. The statistic that scares me the most, especially having one of my kids fall into this category in a way, is the generation born after the year 2000 in this country is going to be the first generation in the history of this country to have a shorter lifespan than their parents. What the heck is going on? I mean, with all the technology, all the advancement that we have in medicine and all this, we're going to start dying sooner. You can't tell me it doesn't have something to do with the food these kids are eating and the type of food, the amount of food. I won't argue that it's got to do with sedentary lifestyles and lack of exercise and sitting in front of screens and these kind of things. But on the other hand, I have a daughter who falls into that category. I work with kids and work in these cafeterias. That's pretty alarming. That helps me do what I do on a daily basis, just to say we've got to change. We've got to do something about it. So the 4 pillars of sustainable food are environmental, local economic, social, and health. Let's talk about each one really quick. So the environmental impact is the impact that food production has on our planet, on our ecosystems. How is it impacting the world around us? Local economic, Look around, the food, the farmers, the businesses, the small businesses, asking the question, where does the food come from and who's getting the dollars that we're spending for our food? Social concerns, that's the way that living beings are treated or compensated or are affected by food production, whether it's fair trade, animal welfare, just what's right in the food production today. And the last pillar, which in many cases people can really connect with, is the sustainability of our own health and well-being and our children's. What we put into our bodies, how we eat, what we eat, impacts our health and our well-being, and those are the 4 pillars of sustainable food.